Egyptians, and this is something which I feel very few Egyptologists have paid attention to, because it's outside of the scope of archaeology.
Yeah.
But it is, what did the ancient Egyptians really believe about an afterlife? And what they believed is very much like what Buddhism and every other very complex religion believes, namely that when you died, there were several opportunities presented to the deceased soul.
Yeah.
One of them was rather straightforward reincarnation. The other one was a bit of like a staying in between two existences, between two lives. But there was also something which they felt was the most important bit, which most cultures have called ascension. And this was literally, to use Buddhist terminology, something whereby they believed that they would be made whole once again with the soul. They believed that at a certain moment of a soul's existence, it was futile for a soul to continue to be incarnating over and over again, and they felt that the mission was completed, and that hence a soul would return, or would be allowed to return to what they call the One, the Creator God. And that is obviously something which, in a much more basic concept, is so common to all religions.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, this is a fascinating area in regards to reincarnation. And do you think that the Egyptians could have some kind of technique in order to, let's say, that they wanted to, a person who wanted to, I guess, go from one body into another, or reincarnate into a certain family line, or something like that? I mean, do you think that they had some kind of technique for this to be able to kind of do that?
I think the answer is we don't know, but we can kind of like look at and see what is happening with the Tibetans, who very much kind of like know that when a Dalai Lama dies, they go in search throughout the kingdom in search of what they believe is the next incarnation of the Dalai Lama. So they literally believe that there is one soul which keeps incarnating time and time again to be their leader. And though I've never studied Tibetan and this quest for finding the Dalai Lama intimately, but you would think that they have developed some kind of guidelines or techniques, whether they are correct or not, to try and identify which body has received this reincarnated person. So, as the Tibetans are doing this, if the same concept was sought for in ancient Egypt, then you would kind of like think, yes, they did this as well. But again, the underlying principle, I think, of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh was not that he would come back and reincarnate all the time. If anything, they felt that when you became a pharaoh, you were at the top of your awareness, your top of your knowledge. They literally considered the role of the pharaoh to be a person who bonded the earthly realm with the afterlife, and he had almost literally one foot in this reality and another foot in the other. And they didn't want him, every other incarnation to come back. They felt, from what we can gather, that when his life was finished, he had fulfilled everything he could possibly do, and he was invited to return to the Creator God.
Ah, interesting. I read in your short blurb about your book, the Canopus Revelation, regarding the soul after death and so forth, that they entered into the duat, but you also in paragraphs said, that this is also known as Nibiru, I guess, and this kind of brings, some other things to mind, as the Planet X myth and so forth. Do you think that there's a connection here between Nibiru and Planet X and the duat?
Well, I think what has happened is that Zechariah Sitchin has somewhat misinterpreted concepts which he has interpreted literally and in a Velikovskian manner. That is to say, he has identified them with planets. In my book, I'm saying that Duat is another worldly realm, but that it does have some geography to it, and that this geography was also embedded into the construction of the pyramids and of the Great Pyramid as well. And there you find things like that. Ancient Egyptians spoke of the crossing as well, of a place where Atum descended and all of these things.
Yeah.
And the question is, do we need to take that literally, and do we need to take that as extraterrestrial beings? And I'm not going to speak about Sumeria, even though the one thing which the experts agree upon is that if there is one thing which the ancient Egyptians and the Sumerians had in common, then it is this myth of Osiris in slightly different formats, but very much central to both cultures. And when you look at ancient Egypt, the question really has to be that when you look into other stuff like Jeremy Nadler, do you have to interpret that as every single pharaoh, would he have been visited by an extraterrestrial being from a planet somewhere? And why would pharaohs been practicing this ritual whereby the Hapsat ritual, which in essence was for them a test that they could still control these kind of things? I think the problem of the extraterrestrial hypothesis of Nibiru and to some extent others is, as I said earlier, the fact that Egyptologists continue to refuse to look into the religious dimension of what ancient Egypt was all about. And when you do not go into that, you leave people with an absolute void. They give you the documents which the ancient Egyptians have, but they don't give any guidelines as to what it might be or what it might represent.
Yeah.
And largely the Egyptologists do this because they don't have any idea themselves either. But there are people out there like Jeremy Nadler, and there are people like Zahi Hawass and Mark Lehner who are at least beginning to realize that they should start touching upon this subject, even though it's not their core area of expertise. Because if you leave it without any discussion whatsoever, then in my opinion, you leave out the greatest contribution of what ancient Egypt was all about. That's not that they were in contact with extraterrestrial beings, but that they had an extremely complex and extremely interesting concept of what happened to the soul and what we were here for, and potentially what could be done on this earth in a completely different way, both politically and sociologically.
Do you think that people like Hawass and so forth they are let's say in the future years here are gonna introduce this, because I guess that this is becoming more and more popular, with books, of course, such as yours, but also people like Graham Hancock, I guess, and Robert Bauval, they write about this. I mean, okay, I guess that these kind of connect with the Stargate conundrum that we're going to dive into a little bit later also, of course, but do you think that we potentially might see a rise or in regards to the more esoteric aspect of Egyptology?
Well, Hawass and Lehner, each in their own way, have tried to push this into some direction. Hawass has been focusing specifically on kind of like saying, well, the pharaoh identified with the sun god. Lehner has done more in looking at the Egyptian, at the Giza plateau as a whole, and he has been saying that some of the features of what are going on the Giza plateau not only are found astronomically, as in alignments and kind of like solar phenomena, but also that they are underscored or underwritten or have an equivalent double-edged sword, because if they go too far, the other ones will shoot them down and say, okay, that's it, they've lost it. They will not accept it.
Yeah.
So at the same time, both of them have tried, and it's not for want of not trying that we're still stuck in this old rut of Egyptology not moving forward. When you look in the world of archaeology, they don't have very good things to say about Egyptologists in general, and it's a problem of that field, and it'll take time. Almost the worst thing which can happen, of course, is that extreme theories are proposed about Egyptology, and I would qualify the extraterrestrial hypothesis in there. When you look at people like von Däniken, they have done a massive amount of good for getting archaeologists and scientists off their behind and start to look into various things. And the Nazca lines is probably the best example of it, whereby we now have a thorough, decent, good, solid understanding of what they were. When von Däniken started 30, 40 years ago, they hadn't even bothered looking into that.
Yeah.
When you look at other fields, the same thing has always happened. When you look at Egyptology, hardly anything has happened. And it are actually people like Hawass and Lehner who, as youngsters, were very much influenced by this magical dimension, this extraterrestrial dimension, the magic of Egypt, the way it was proposed by people like Edgar Cayce. They have tried to do something, but it's kind of like, if you're confronted with a corpse, you can be the best doctor that you want. You can only, at best, try and revive it again. You will never make it into an Olympic champion. And that's a bit of the challenge which Lehner and Hawass are facing.
Yeah. I read an article a while back that actually speculated on the fact that Hawass was actually had some of his degrees, I think, partially funded by people who are involved in the Edgar Cayce research. What's it called? ARE or something like that?
Yes, the associations, whatever it's called, for enlightenment and something. But yes, both Lehner and Cayce, both Lehner and Hawass were definitely known to this foundation, and have said that they've gotten grants from them.
Yeah.
By default, I think an organization like the Cayce Foundation, they're very interested in places like Giza, and over the years they have tried to get interest into Cayce's theories. So, if they did, I don't know to what extent they sponsored Hawass and Lehner. They did sponsor them, but they obviously are very clever in identifying people, because Hawass and Lehner are the brightest sparks on the Giza plateau at the moment.
So there could be some. I mean, I'm totally not against it in any way. It merely makes all things more interesting, because then it seems like we have a guy, in regards to Hawass at least, who has, on the exterior or in the media, are not too fond of diving into a lot of these areas, but on the same time we have the Cayce Foundation. We have a connection there that actually are interested in finding the hidden records, the vault, and so forth. I mean, do you think that is a possibility, that we have people down there working on these things now in Giza?
I don't think that there's any private or secret investigations going on. There were some extremely